Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life.
Hey everybody, on this episode I've got my friend Buck Peddicord, a range owner, firearms training company owner, and just all around good guy from basically Oz in Kansas. So even has the yellow brick road in his hometown.
Yes. Very proud.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background there, Buck?
Well, my background is pretty boring. And most of it comes from failure, at least in terms of what we do here. I was just pretty much a farmer in northeastern Kansas, and got into during college. Got into working out more. I mean, I was a beast going into college. Just a real muscled up monster at about 6'1", 130 pounds, and really bulked myself up in 3.5 years of college and walked out, 6'2", 160 pounds. So, you can imagine, what that was like. And I got into EMS, came in EMT, and it was just local fire department stuff, and then firefighting. And my my fire chief, he got into law enforcement, and he got on the county. He's like, "Hey man, you can come up here, like, we get to really drive fast, and carry guns and stuff." So that's kind of what I did. A couple of years of just kind of a reserve sort of capacity with them, and then got into SWAT. It was a year getting into SWAT. Nobody really liked a part-timer or a reserve to mix it up with the full-time guys. And but anyway, I finally dodged all the black balls, got on SWAT, and spent the next 20 years there, working undercover, doing training and SWAT stuff for a small rural department. So that's kind of my background.
Well, I've got a feeling you probably worked some cases in Manhattan, right?
I worked for a buddy.
There's a joke there. It's a small town. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who don't realize, the next town over from where Buck lives is Manhattan, Kansas. It's not quite the Manhattan you think of when I say the name.
Not quite. Home of the Wildcats, who lost by 3 in Ireland to Iowa State, if anybody was gambling. So good for Iowa State, bad for us.
I saw a Charlie Kirk episode not too long ago in Manhattan, Kansas on YouTube.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, he was at the college campus.
Yeah, he does. He does come there. Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah. I guess he went to school there. I didn't know that.
Really? I didn't know that either.
I guess so. I that's just what I heard.
So before we start talking about your range, which is one of my favorite places to come teach, before we get into that, like the training, I've got to share a story about the first time I came to teach at your range, because I think people will get a kick out of this. So my wife, Angela, and I are driving on this, because like a sizable chunk of the way to your range is off the interstate from my direction, right? So it's all like, Kansas state roads, which are very straight and go a long way in one direction with not much around them, but just basically grass, right? So we're driving down the road and the sky's looking kind of funny. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's going to rain. And then right out of the movie Twister, I see this storm chaser van come screaming past me, twice the speed limit, headed in the same direction I'm headed. And I remember thinking this was not a good sign. Like there was probably something wrong with this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we're actually watching like the funnels form as we drive to your place. And we wound up, how late were we in the bar in your basement, the bar and gym in your basement, waiting for the storm to pass?
I don't know. About 10 minutes after you arrived, they closed the bar because the tornado was coming, so we had to go to the basement. And it was classic Kansas. We stood outside and tried to look at the dark sky, you know. Classic Kansas.
No, I will never forget when that van screamed past us with like, storm chasers written on the side, and like came screaming past us. And Angela and I looked at each other like, I'm not from around here, but I don't think that's a good sign.
I've got a friend in Ohio that I've trained with at the Ohio Tactical Officers Association a few times. I'm like, you got to come to Kansas. She's canine officer. She has a small farm. I'm like, you got to come down and visit, see what it's like. We'll shoot. She's like, I don't know about those tornadoes down there. So yeah, she hasn't come because of that yet.
So let's talk about your range, because I really do like your facility. I think it's kind of a hidden gem. So how did this come to be? Because it's on your farm, right?
Yeah. We had the classic farm range there for a long time, for Plinkin. And the sheriff's department range, it was a nice square range, but it just wasn't set up for SWAT training at all. Like just nothing there, And I saw, I don't know, 95 to 97 is when I was getting on the SWAT team, working my way up there. And our training was pretty mediocre. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just you can only do so much on a square range, in terms of a SWAT team. And, we talked it over. I visited several other facilities around the country training, and stole stuff from all of those facilities and, put them in where I had room to.
Yeah, it's set up really nice. I especially enjoy the Gates of Hell sign on the entrance.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people walk in and laugh, and then when they get done at the end of the day and it's 110, or you experienced one of those days out there, it's like they're like, yeah, that's literally the Gates of Hell for sure.
I thought we were about to kill a couple people that day. It was hot. Yeah, it was very hot.
Yeah.
And you do a lot of stuff, like you contracted out to Air Force SOF a lot now, right?
I get a few contracts through that. My son worked his way up as a TAC P, and he was with a local ASOS over here at Salina. And then he made it into the STSs and went full time, and he's down at Benning now. So I get a lot of reach through him. Units looking for a place to, either pre or post deployment, you know what I mean? Just as a unit, get together, shoot, unwind. They can hang out in Aggieville and Manhattan, and it's just, you've been here. You can tell there's not much pressure around this area, being pretty rural.
It is one of, and this is not an exaggeration, it's one of my favorite places to teach, just because of the overall experience. I mean, you got a couple little restaurants right there in town. You've got your Airbnb that you always let us crash out in. And it's a nice little town. It's a nice range and a nice little town. And it's an enjoyable time.
Yeah, it is a nice place around here. Except for the weather in the middle of summer or whenever we catch one of those blizzards, other than that, it's not. The Kansas is, when my son went to Benning down there in Columbus, everybody's like, oh, you're going to hate it down there. Like just the heat and the humidity. And after he was there about a year, I said, what do you think? And he goes, it's literally just Kansas with less cold weather. It's like, it's no hotter or worse down here than it is in Kansas.
All right, let's talk about training a little bit. Like, I mean, apart from SWAT, let's kind of talk about your training journey. Like what paths have you taken? How has it evolved over the years? How has your philosophy changed?
Yeah, a bunch. Because, again, I started in 90 in law enforcement, and by 92, I was like the assistant firearms instructor. And the way you kind of got there was based on how you shot, it didn't have anything to do with anything else. And literally went 3-4 years of asking people, why they missed, and asking people to, when they hit, to do that again, rather than actually like giving them a reason, because I didn't know a reason. I didn't have any idea why I shot good. And to be honest with you, I really didn't shoot good. I compensated for a lot of mistakes. I just compensated consistently. I didn't find that out until later, And so we were struggling around, and I was pretty aware from traveling around the country and training with other. I got an opportunity because the sheriff would send me off rather than lose somebody off the road, So I would be the guy that would go off to training, and met a lot of people. And in the 90s, the vast majority of them were more like federal SWAT guys, or like Marshall SOG and guys like that. A few military special operations would scatter in and stuff, but a lot of that was in-house in the 90s. So anyway, I knew we were lacking things here, and I figured in the back of my feeble little mind that it started with it just started with principles and the basics. Reached out to a traveling instructor. His name was Jim Cruz, taught Marksman Enterprises or something. In fact, I've stolen some of the names that he uses, but he had like combat handguns, some of the answer. He was a gun sight guy, and so really that was the base. What we did was gun sight, technique, and that was the start. It was a solid start. There's no doubt about it. Jim was a very good instructor for us, and then just went from there to different instructors all over the country. I would say Max Joseph at DAG and TFTT, but where I got introduced to him was at down at T's, doing explosive breaching, but his approach to it, and all these things are dated today for sure, but they were solid foundations that gave people a good basis, a good approach, especially the law enforcement side. And we did the best we could to bring that kind of stuff back to them. We've had a lot of good instructors through here. The TDSA guys are Rogers Shooting School, that's kind of where they go through at, stuff like that. And then really and truly, things really started changing for me in about 05 to 10. That's when a lot of the guys with the GWAT, and so to be, it's really kind of weird. In the 90s, you go places and say there'd be a Navy SEAL in there, and be like, oh my God, there's a Navy SEAL class, or there's a Green Beret class, right? And except for, the tip of the spear guys, really these guys were just training their ass off and not you know what I mean? They were getting torn down, and not the collar was left on, and they're like, oh, you're SWAT, you get to go hit houses, and they thought we were cool. Well, by 05, you know what I mean? They were the cool guy stuff. And the TTPs that came back from that, when I look back at the stuff we were doing in the 90s, they were transformative, the lessons learned there. And there's still a lot of people not accepting those lessons in terms of the country, in terms of what goes on around. But the lessons learned there are transformative. And one of the biggest things it taught me is that principles are principles, like, period. There's really not military tactics, and there's really not law enforcement tactics. There's really not civilian tactics. You know what I mean? The principles are principles. Now we apply them a little bit different, but you got to learn the principles to start with. And I will tell you the truth. Well, our first instructor was SF, and we're talking 93 with our SWAT team. But he came up, he was SF, and so it was all SAS based stuff, and until I left, we were still using SAS terminologies, FUPs, FAPs, we were using color codes on the houses and stuff. And even early on, we were doing hard corners, dictating that in training or in the briefing, And like I said, training has changed a lot over the years, and adapting to that, if you believe in principles, adapting to that has been fairly easy.
It's always interesting to me to kind of look back, because I spanned, the pre-GWAT era
Yeah.
until basically the end of the GWAT, plus the Chicago PD stuff mixed in there as well, and just watching how things changed. But when you get right down to it, the principles didn't change, like you said.
No.
We just figured out better ways to apply them.
Exactly.
More subtle, more nuanced, more sophisticated. And I don't really want to say advanced, because it's not really that. It's just there's nuance of these things that you figure out through experience that you can't even pick up on if you don't have the experience. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. And there's something to be said, especially for somebody like me. Yeah, say you're 10 years into, really being fairly dominant in the tiny little small pond that I came from, and then getting exposed to say some of these Delta guys that did things, they comprehended things at a speed that I didn't know was possible. Just didn't even know that, and I'm like, wow, we are not getting enough repetitions at some of this stuff either. You know what I mean? Especially in law enforcement. We just don't get enough repetitions at some things.
Well, and that I think is one of the big weaknesses, like, law enforcement, vice, military. But I don't really know how you can fix it, to be honest. And I've had this conversation with a few people, and it's just the staffing levels and the op tempo don't allow it.
No,
like
they don't.
People don't understand that law enforcement is basically always deployed.
Yeah.
You're not getting a huge amount of reps in when you're deployed, because you're doing the real thing. But you've got the train up time, and law enforcement doesn't get the train up time.
Yeah, and up to I couldn't give you a year, but up to, I don't know, say 2010, we're a 18, 19 man department with 6 guys on SWAT. We are on call 24/7, like literally on call 24. Like you say, you're constantly deployed, and the vast majority of our call outs did not occur, but with any planning,
Yeah.
It comes out of nowhere.
Well, I look back at my time on SWAT now, and being the retired guy now, I can't even understand how we maintained that op tempo.
Yeah.
And had a life. Like, looking back on it, it's not really a healthy way to run an organization. And I think here's another thought on this that I've had a lot throughout the last 10 years or so. And people tend to look at this one of these two ways, but they're both true, like a lot of other things, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff in the training community and law enforcement, military, competitive shooting right now where people are very binary about something, but both sides actually have a truth. You know what I mean? It's a nuance, like we said a minute ago about principles. And if your op tempo is too high, that dulls your edge. And if your op tempo is too low, that also dulls your edge in a different way.
Yeah.
Because I don't care. I don't care if you're in an SMU. I don't care if you're on a big city SWAT team or on a SIF team. Most of the real world incidents go pretty much without severe complications. You know what I mean? They pretty much go according to plan most of the time. Most of the time, you're barely even opposed when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
So having that high op tempo and not enough time to train can make you sloppy through complacency.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the converse also dulls you, because if you have all the time in the world to train, but you're never testing it for real, then you start to get into that kind of academic overanalyzation of things. Well, if we do it this way, like that kind of good idea fairy stuff where you're not testing it against a non-cooperative opponent. So you start coming up with these things that look really good on paper that may not be the best way to actually handle the situation.
Right.
And I really think there's a lot of, you got to find, if I was going to give one message to like administrators or big bosses of SWAT teams, right? You've got to manage that op tempo where it's the right amount. You need to have a high enough op tempo where guys are getting the seasoning of the real world where it really counts. But they still got enough time to train. And you can't have so much training and so little op tempo that guys start to get unrealistic about things.
Right.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. KHP, like the Highway Patrol here, that they, back in the 90s, early 2000s, you know, the times that I can really speak to them, they had a badass team. I mean, they were, and they were big dudes, and, you know, they would get plenty of training, lots of bullets, and their problem was the op tempo, in that they have to respond to the whole state. So there may be a guy in Kansas City has to go to Colby, you know, before they had the helicopter or the plane available to them. They had to go to Colby, you know, 110 miles an hour down interstate. So they were worked all day. They went out with their wife. They were eating. They got called out as supper. They have to get in. They drive basically 4.5 hours. And then they got, you know, and then they got to drive home, and then they got to go back on shift, you know, and yeah, that they burned out fast, you know, that there was guys there that burn out fast. And I would say, and I don't know if this is a problem, like I'm not 100% sure where the problem lies, but I do think that our type A personality, or our need to be in control or to perform, gets taken advantage of, you know, by administrators a lot, you know, because they just count on it. Okay, well, you've been going 24 hours, but you got an 8-hour shift to work, and they know we'll work it. You know what I mean? And I think that's changing. I don't think people do that as much today, but, you know, back in the day, boy, that was for sure the way we did it.
Oh, and like Angela can tell you stories about me working a day tour, then getting a call out while I was on my way home, turning back around, going into work. That job ends quick, come home, eat a quick dinner, go to sleep at like midnight, get a call at 1 o'clock in the morning to go out and do another job, roll from that one back into the shift. And then before you know it, do the whole thing all over again the next day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Not to mention the pieces of life that people give up. And super hard on the home life. You know what I mean? But having talked to a lot of guys that did that, we all see the destruction it created in our personal lives, and yet there's not very many of us that would change that. Like I would, you know what I mean? You give me a call, you say, hey, we got to go buy dope, you know, at 1 o'clock this morning. Okay, I'm gone, you know? Well, wait a minute, you're supposed to take, you know, your kid to school in the morning. Well, I don't know when I'll be back, figure it out. And, you know, that's kind of an asshole thing, but, you know, some people live for that. I don't know if it's the adrenaline rush. I don't know if it's dopamine. I don't know. You know, I'm not a smart man, but some people live for those call outs and live for those opportunities to do buys, and, you know, and just most of us that were good at what we did were kind of that way.
You know, and that's another interesting point, right? Because, like, you know, now I'm retired and I'm happy to be retired. Like, I'm enjoying being retired. I'm nostalgic for the person I was, but it doesn't mean I want to go be that person again. You know what I mean?
I'm not. I'm the other guy.
I'm happy I did it, but I'm also happy that it's done, if that makes sense.
I was happy to walk away when I did, but a month later, I was like, oh my God.
Well, that's kind of
identity.
Well, that's kind of where I'm going with it. Is it like it was about a year's adjustment for me before I settled into it. And I really think that was mainly adjusting to not having that edge, like you're talking about, not being that guy anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm okay with not being that guy anymore now, but it took about a year to figure that out. You know, It really did.
I like to, and, you know, I also do the 501c thing with the, you know, post-traumatic growth and, you know, suicide prevention thing, you know, too. And all of this comes full circle, but I like to talk about our perspective. And this is something that maybe I'm running down a rabbit hole here, but this is something that I see in firearms instructors or tactics instructors or whatever. And a lot of guys, you know, we all have egos. I get it. I certainly have a big one, but you know, a lot of guys are, hey, this is the way, this is how, like, this is, and I'm telling you, because I was in a gunfight and this worked, or I was, the problem is our perspectives are so narrow. I don't pretend to have a perspective for Chicago. I'm a rural country, you know what I mean? I go into people's trailer houses and buy drugs. We kick down more trailer house doors, single wides, than we did by far nice houses, obviously, so my perspective's really limited. I guess for an example, draw strokes. And Scott Jedlinski and I have had a lot of talk about this, all I tell Scott is in 27 years, I never had to outdraw anybody. I was either guns were already out because I made good, situational awareness, made good decisions, or if something happened, I was generally so close that it wasn't a gunfight. It was a fight for his gun or his whatever, you know what I mean? So I have a different perspective, and I know it's not 100%. I know that patrol officers need to have a good, smooth, solid draw because we're reactive, right? And while you say, hey, you should always be switched on and, 100% aware, that's just not, that's not possible, especially in today's world with cell phones where I guess in a way I was lucky. Nobody could call me when I was off on ops because I didn't have a cell phone, right? You couldn't do it. But yeah, so perspective is a big thing. And as you get towards retirement, perspective is a big thing. Perspective of who we see ourselves as, and when I talk to younger people now, like at SWAT conferences, like we're teaching that and stuff, I like the last 30 minutes is just me lecturing young people on what it's going to be like to be an old man someday. And, one of my things is, hey, define your perspective, not as a law enforcement officer, but about who you are inside, which makes us good law enforcement officers or good SWAT officers, but separate those two things. You can still be committed. You can still be loyal. You can still, you can still have the drive to be a defender of the innocent. You know what I mean? But if you picture yourself as a law enforcement officer, someday you won't be, or a spec ops guy or whatever it is. Someday you won't be,
Well, and so there's like 3 or 4 different rabbit holes I'm going to go down from this one. I can see already. But so I think, because I tend to wax philosophic, that we're pretty good friends. Yeah. I think it's important to have the right self-identity, kind of like what you're saying. Being the right kind of person is what made me, I believe I was at least, a good cop and a good Green Beret because of the person that I was. But the person that I was wasn't limited to being a cop or a Green Beret. You see what I'm saying? Like that's something I did. And those things can always be taken away from you. I could have lost a leg getting IED'd and never been able to do it again. I could have been fired from the police department having done nothing wrong, because that happens to cops all the time, right? Like those things are very real and they happen to good people. And I think the people whose identity is wrapped up in that job description have the hard time dealing with it. But the people whose identity is wrapped up in being the kind of person who was good at that job, it's a different way of looking at it. Am I making sense?
It makes total sense. In fact, the next big step there is what created the difference between the two, because there's, they say a lot of our identity is already formed by the time we're about 10, 11, 12 years old, you know what I mean? Or in that formative, when your brain's still forming. Yep. So, what is it? And, those people that, people probably kind of like me, that identify with the success or identify with, with being something. We struggle a lot more than people who are just really fairly confident in themselves, it's the process, not the outcome. But but that's hard. But that's hard.
And looking back on that, here's another rabbit hole. So looking back on that, like I remember as a kid, because as a kid, like I liked comic books and superhero stuff and, my dad's Western movies. And, I was already into martial arts as a little kid. So like I was already watching samurai movies and stuff like that. But I was weird because most people like this stuff in a different way than I did. I would watch the stuff or read the comic books, or watch Shane with my dad, or, and I wanted to be that kind of person. So like from an early age, like I knew not necessarily what job I wanted to have, whether soldier or cop or whatever, but the kind of person I wanted to be. And I think that's the perspective shift that makes it different. I think that made it easier for me, because it wasn't about I had to be a big city cop, or I had to be in special operations, or it was more, I want to be this kind of man. And I think that's, if I was going to tell a young person how to kind of like adjust the right perspective that would carry him through in either line of work, I think I'd recommend that, because that way your self-worth isn't wrapped up in a title that someone can take away.
Yeah. That's a very healthy way. If I give, and sometimes you get what would you give your younger self advice or something like that, or advice of my son when he
I would tell my younger self not to date crazy women.
Yeah, right. Yeah, me too. Me too. It's, the problem is those are open tags. You have to draw for one of the others and aren't crazy. And the odds of catching a tag for that are really low, man, really low. But I always, the number one piece of advice I tell young people, especially if they're going to the military or they're going into something that's going to be physically and mentally hard, is everybody's scared. And normally the people who are the loudest are the most scared, but they just have so it's okay. That's okay. Having doubts and fear is okay. It's just, you got to figure out a way to put it aside. But the next thing is exactly like, know your why, or have a why, and then the process is what matters, the why. That's it. If it's all about, hey, the outcome, man, when things get hard, it's really easy to falter there.
So I'm going to circle back around to something you said a minute ago that I really liked, if you don't mind. And it's related to what we're talking about, but it's kind of a different one of the rabbit holes. So perspective when it comes to gunfights and critical incidents and prevailing in them, right? I know people that have survived a gunfight or two, or maybe even three, that honestly, I guarantee you they have no idea why they won.
Yeah.
No clue, no idea. And a lot of times they probably didn't win because of something they did right. They probably won because of something the other guy didn't win. Right. And I'm not speaking ill of anybody when I say this. I mean, they stepped up, they did what they had to do. That's not my point. But I think all too often in the training community, we have people talking about how to prevail in like the larger category of gunfights, right? Right. And what they're talking about, they may or may not have any personal experience in, or they may have. We tend to hold on to what worked for us.
Yeah.
And try to apply it in situations that it may not necessarily apply in. Right. And I think that is an important thing you said a minute ago about perspective. I can't say that I've ever cleared a single wide trailer. I've never done it. Right. There's probably nuances to that I would need to think about to be truly good at it. You know what I mean? But I can tell you how to hit the third floor of a Greystone or a courtyard apartment building.
Right.
Yeah. Or a mud hut. So this is something that I think really matters. And I think this is something that has led to a lot of, I don't want to say deficiencies, because that's too harsh. Maybe lack of optimal application of principles. Let's put it that way. So I'm not saying it's not good training. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not talking bad about people when I say this. But like, I know plenty of people that have done more in the GWAT than I did. But they haven't done the things I've done as a cop.
Right.
I know people that have done the things I've done as a cop, but they haven't done what I did in the GWAT.
Mm-hmm.
I know people that have done way more, who are way better competitive shooters than I'll ever be, but they haven't done the other two. And all of those perspectives have their, and I'm not tooting my own horn when I'm saying this, it's just the easy example, right? All those perspectives have value, and it's knowing to draw the right value from each perspective and figuring out how it applies to you, rather than saying, this is the way I did it, so this is the way it has to be done, if that makes sense. Like another great example, let's talk about, say, maybe just some of the legends, right? I mean, pick any of the legends off the top of your head. Jelly Bryce, Jim Turillo, like guys that have just been like huge numbers of gunfights and knew their craft. Like these guys were seriously on top of their game. But things have evolved since then. Weapons have evolved since then. Rules of engagement have evolved since then. Societal norms have evolved since then. The level of the threat has evolved since then. And that's not taking anything away from any of those guys, right? It's just saying that
they'd be successful today.
Oh yeah, but they would do things differently.
Right. They wouldn't do it the same way, would they? But they'd be successful today. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like Bill Jordan, right? Like Bill Jordan was one of my dad's firearms instructors. I've got a signed copy of his book. Yeah, I have a signed copy of No Second Place Winner addressed to my dad.
Yeah.
Nobody is doing clamshell spring-loaded leather holsters for revolvers today.
No.
But that was cutting-edge gunfighting for the environment he was in. Yeah. You're not going to do it today, but it worked really well for him. And
anybody ever wonder why most of the trigger guards weren't covered? You know, in those old police holsters.
Yeah, so you could do the rock back.
Yeah, absolutely. Finger went on the trigger and it went in the holster, right? But it had a 12-pound or 10-pound double. You know, the problem was in the 90s, we were transitioning 5906s, and a lot of the old guys carried revolvers. I had a really, really scary few years in there, you know, with guys, fingers going on triggers really, really early, you know, it's like, and then they didn't want to decock them. It's like, no, guys, like, it's not 1911 either. Like, yeah, there's, you know, I agree 100% with you.
You know, and I think that's something we need to, like, there's two sides to this, right? And both have positives and negatives. And I see both in the industry and in the shooting community. A lot of the younger shooters, especially the more competition-minded shooters, like, I had a class the other day where nobody knew who Cooper was.
Really?
Like, how do you not know who Jeff Cooper was? I mean, you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like we need to respect and learn from the people that came before us. I guarantee you a lot of my students don't know who Jelly Bryce was, you know, or Hamer, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, all these gunfighters that were larger than life. But we need to know those things, and we need to look at those things and study them for the principles, like you said, right? And I think that neglecting that is a big issue, and that's one side of the coin. And then the other side of the coin is what I see a lot. And once again, I'm not being negative about anyone when I say this, but I see guys that get stuck in amber like a fossilized insect the day they retire. This is the way I shot a gun. This is the way I did my gunfights. This is the way it has to be forever after amen, right? And things have changed so much in the last 30 years when it comes to the application of the principles, both for the performance of shooting and for the tactics of gunfighting, that not being willing to change and adapt isn't the right answer. So I think you've got to walk that middle ground. You've got to pay respect to the ones whose shoulders we're standing on, but never stop innovating and experimenting and figuring out better ways to do things too.
Well, like, you know, that calmness, vision. And when I say vision, I'm talking about an appropriate sight picture. You know what I mean? Calmness and vision and minimizing movement on the gun has probably been around since firearms started, you know? Okay, that's still applicable today. You know what I mean? Like that's, you know, that's perfectly applicable today. It's everything else that goes around it, okay? You know, we're not dueling. We're not standing still. We're not taking turns shooting at each other. We're not lining our entire friggin' company up against the other guy's company and just shooting volleys at each other, you know?
So, quick side note: do you know that dueling with wax bullets was actually in the Olympics in the early 20th century?
Really? Yeah.
They wore fencing gear and they had wax bullets in the revolvers.
Now that I could be down for.
They should have kept that sport. They
I'm
absolutely should
bringing
have
that
kept that
back.
sport.
And I'm no the hell with the fencing gear. Let's do it naked. Like wax bullets naked in the Olympics. And they got to rub each other down with oil first. Like, like
Oh my
Greeks did
God.
it.
Oh my God.
Let's go all the way back. Let's have some fun here. Yeah. But yeah, you're totally spot on. One of the things that I look back on that I feel I kind of feel bad about. I feel like I really shorted a lot of people over the years. Was my opinion of how to get better, and I've had a lot of people go on and do a lot of really, really great things in law enforcement and the military. And I've trained high level military guys, way, way beyond my level and stuff like that too. But for years and years, my thing was, hey, we're going to push this until the wheels fall off. And as soon as the wheels fall off, we're going to take back one notch. And that's where I want you to train at. And you're going to get better. And I did get better over 20 some years. But the minuscule amount of better that I got over 20 some years, as opposed to the year after you and I, you came out and did a class and I trained with you, in terms of going to the wheels fall off and then trying to make it work where the wheels fell off. Holy crap. All of a sudden, I got better a little faster. You know what I mean? Well, actually a lot faster, but I'm trying not to, those headphones won't fit if I keep building up that part of it, but yeah, I feel really bad for all those guys that probably limited some progress on them, and whether that was speed or whether that was precision, it's all the same. You know what I mean? But you know what, you don't know what you don't know, so you got to be open to learning, don't you?
Well, and that was the prevailing wisdom, especially in law enforcement training for so long. You can't really fault yourself for you were teaching the way you'd been taught. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it's so I could give you lots of examples of this. Once somebody shows you something and and you see it, it was so apparent. Like it shouldn't have. Anybody that was open to anything should have realized, hey, that's probably, should realize that 10 years ago. Was it Jared and I was talking about on the range one day, and he said, what was it? Oh, he said, you don't really like that shoulders back thing that Scott teaches, do you? And I said, Jared, I've just, been at SWAT. I roll my shoulders forward. You know what I mean? I'm driving the gun. I'm pushing it through, the target. You know what I mean? And he's like, yeah, I get it. He goes, so, what do you deadlift now? And I'm like, well, nothing compared to what I used to. I maybe 400 now, maybe that, I don't know. And he goes, well, let's just say you get 400 on the bar. You bend over and you're going to deadlift that. You roll your shoulders out of their sockets forward, right, to pick it up. I'm like, no, I take my shoulders back to pick it up, don't I? Like, fuck, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that. It's just so apparent, but you just, I don't know. Baseball bats with the words written on them, 4 or 5 times to my head, and I start getting it.
Well, I think that those are always like the lessons that I really remember from the training I've done are the ones where this kind of light bulb comes on and you feel like an idiot for not having thought of this for yourself.
Exactly.
Like, why did I do that? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, geez, I could have named that after myself, had I thought of it, dang it. It's just not many techniques named after me.
Side note, it has always been my personal opinion that you have not truly made it in your chosen career until there's a rule created because of you.
Oh, well, I made it in law enforcement many times then.
Yeah. So I have made it in law enforcement, in the military, and in competition shooting. So
there you go.
If you're not pushing the envelope, you're not trying, right?
And I agree. It's the secret. That's the big magic bullet is, what's on the other side of that sticky part of the envelope.
Well, the best part is when the bosses are like, well, you didn't break any rules, so we're gonna make one because we don't like it.
We don't want to see this again. Yeah. 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 I've been there. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I hold the record though.
Oh, I know.
He holds the record. He was the star at that.
Oh, I definitely don't hold the record in any of the 3 pursuits. No, but I contributed my one little bit.
Right. Yeah. I have a couple they still talk about probably, but that is what it is. It made total sense to me at the time. Well, I'll tell you what I did. I'll tell you a story on that one. So we used to have this big event, bringing in like 100,000 people. Well, the first year we worked, like I said, we had a 19-man department, and we had no idea what it was like working a big event like that, you know. And we got like 6 people out there, and we got the people on the road, and the other people are sleeping, and everybody's just rotating around. And it becomes readily apparent that 6 people cannot do law enforcement. 100,000 drunks at a country and western concert, right? So things.
I feel like that should have been said by the Morgan Freeman narrator voice, but in fact,
yeah. So anyway, there was this group of guys, and they were military, and they had just gotten back from deployment, and actually, there was a rule written for them after this too. But there's like 40 of them. They ride their motorcycles down there. They take up this camping space. They're not even going to you can hear the concert from the campgrounds, and they're just down there drinking. You know what I mean? They're back like 3 days, and this massive brawl breaks out between them and a bunch of college kids, and it's definitely over women. And anyway, I've got a guy with me from a neighboring department. By then, we brought in extra help, so I got a guy with me from the neighboring department. My undersheriff, he's at what we call the law enforcement center. He said, why don't you go down there and see what's happening? Because EMS is hauling a guy out with his head completely opened up by a bottle. So we're heading down this 40-man brawl, and you can see it's going on pretty good down there. And this kid from the other department says, hey, so we gonna wait on backup? And I'm like, brother, there is no backup. Like, there is nobody there. We are it. Like, we're gonna. I said, yes, we are. We're gonna walk right down there. And you know what saved me that day? This is an insane story, but it's true. I'm chewing these guys' ass, getting everybody to stop fighting, and the military guys, the ones I can relate to, and they saw my boots, and I was wearing Adidas GSG9 boots. And this one dude goes, I know who you are. I'm like, no, you don't. I'm nobody. You know what I mean? Like, no, I know who you are. I've seen those boots before. And I'm like, if that's what it takes to calm this.
Oh God. I remember when those boots were the heat, man. I remember when those were the heat. They were squeaky on tile floors when they were wet, though. That's the only complaint that I had.
Yeah, the big complaint people had with them that I talked to is they wore out fast.
Oh, and yeah, they weren't for rocking. They were for CQB. That's all they were.
That's right. Yeah, I'm like, I want them to wear out fast because I can take them out of the box, put them on, and go run. You know what I mean? They were that soft early on. So I don't know, but yeah, things. It's just like there's just different applications to stuff. But anyway, out of that whole thing, I picked out the guy that did it, and you can't escort all these people, and I didn't want him to know I knew he did it. So I sent them all up to the LEC to fill out reports. So here go all these military guys, and I sent all the college guys to the other LEC. And I'm finishing up there, and I get up, and I'm looking around for this guy, and I'm like, hey, where's the tall? I didn't even get his freaking name. I didn't carry a pen in those days. To be fair, I got out a lot of reports not carrying a pen. But anyway, like, hey, where's the tall guy with the mustache? And they're like, oh, I don't know who you're talking about. I'm like, oh, you motherfuckers. I'm like, come on now. And finally, we don't find him, and they all go back. So I'm like, I've had it. I'm going back down there. So I go down there, and I said, guys, really just send the dude up. I'm like, hey, yeah, this is a felony, but I'm not telling them it is. I said, send him up. And they're like, well, we don't know. And I said, look, that's fine. I said, everybody needs to move away from these motorcycles. And I looked at that guy from the other department. I said, yeah, you know, call the wreckers that we talked to earlier. They're at the gate, send them on down. And the guy's like, what are you going to do with wreckers? I said, all these bikes are evidence. I'm taking every one of these motorcycles and we're going to dust them for prints and look for blood splatter and stuff like that. But all these bikes are mine tonight. We're going to load them all up. I said, I've already got the trucks coming. And a guy gets on his phone. He says, just a minute. He dials, calls. And, you know, the guy amazingly shows up with two of his friends. They make sure he gets there. Well, in the meantime, they've all talked to their civilian buddy, who's their mechanic. They talk him into going up and basically confessing to him. So anyway, Bill's standing there. Well, my undersheriff, he's standing there and he's like, gosh, I don't know what we got. We got this guy confessing. You say you've got probable cause to arrest this guy. I'm like, yeah, makes total sense, Bill. No worries. Arrest them both. And he goes, what? I said, arrest them both. We have probable cause to believe that guy did it. And the other guy's confessing. Let's just arrest them both. Let the court figure it out. And Bill's like, yeah. And of course, he's tired and grumpy too. He's like, yeah, that's a good idea. He's been in law enforcement 20 some years, you know? And the county attorney just happens to be walking behind him. Gathers her up and they're talking and she keeps looking over at me and then he points at me and you can just see her. She's so full of disdain. And she just stomps off. Bill says, evidently we can't arrest two people for the same crime under different reasons. Oh, well, I guess that's a new rule now. I don't know. I didn't know we couldn't do that, but whatever. Yeah. Seemed like a good solution at the time.
It was downright. Who was the king that was going to threaten to cut the baby in half to satisfy the paternity in the Bible? Was that Solomon?
You're a little out of my area expertise.
But you know what I'm talking about,
I know,
right?
I know the story.
Yeah. That was kind of the elegance of that solution.
Yeah.
We'll just lock them both up until one decides he's gonna.
Somebody will decide.
Yeah.
If not, try them both and see which one's guilty. You know, heck, let's put them on a stool and dip them in water, or let's light them on fire. If they live, they're guilty. If they don't live, well,
Oh, I don't think they'd allow that. I don't think the grand jury would work that way.
Yes, not anymore. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good thing we don't go down too deep down rabbit holes.
So, real quick before we wrap up, what would you say? Because you've been doing this a long time. I mean, you've been running the range a long time. You've been doing law enforcement a long time, teaching a long time. I'm going to ask you to do what you just said you have to think about doing. What would you tell your young self who's starting out in the career? What would you tell that young man? Apart from not dating crazy women, we already established that.
Yeah, you have. For me, it's don't get wrapped up. I don't know how to say it. Don't get hero worship on your instructors.
Yeah.
Don't get wrapped up in you can have friends, and I have a lot of friends in the industry. And when we're at SHOT Show, a fight breaks out circle bar, I'm jumping in for my friends. I'm not even asking what, you know what I mean? But it's don't get that hero worship, because if you find something, maybe something, a weakness in their technique or something like that, if hero worship, you're far more likely to blindly defend that than to make a transition. You know what I mean? And I see that a lot. A lot of students come in who have trained around with a lot of other people, and you'll be doing something and they'll say, well, this is what so-and-so taught me. And I'm like, that's fine. Like, that's a viable you can do that, or you paid me to be here today. You can try my technique for the day. And then, you know what I mean? Pick the one you like the best, but
Well, and we're all fallible, but I think it goes even deeper than that. So I'm going to tell you a story from my martial arts days, right? We had a visiting instructor come in to teach a seminar, really famous guy from Japan, really, really good, like really good. And when he would pin somebody, he had a very upright posture. Like he would be like, knee on chest, or got him in like an arm bar, arm block, but his upper body would be very upright. And we all started trying to do the techniques just like that because he was doing them that way and we were imitating the way he did them. We found out after he left that he had broken his back and that's how he had to do them to compensate. And that the techniques were actually better if you lean forward, right? So I think that happens a lot. Like that happens a lot with instructors. Like I always tell people, you've been in my classes, you know how I teach grip and I say it's an individual thing. Well, I've got nerve damage in my right hand from the Army. So my grip has to be done a certain way because I'm compensating for an injury.
Yeah.
Right. But it would be foolish for someone who doesn't have that injury to imitate what I'm doing because they don't need it.
They'll give them, right. They have an advantage the other way.
Right. And I think a lot of times we lose sight of that. Just like a lot of times we lose sight of the fact that, or like, here's another example, like there's an up and coming kid in USPSA, Christian Seiler. I say up and coming, he's already been national champion like a million times. Like he's not just up and coming, he's arrived, but he's young, Amazing athlete, just phenomenal athlete. Played baseball nationally as a teenager, like really, really good.
Yeah.
And he's got really good movement, as you would expect from a sports background. But I'm 6'3", and Christian Seiler is not 6'3". For me to try to imitate his way of moving with my injuries at my age and my height would be counterproductive for me. It's not going to work for me. Even though the principles I need to follow are the same, I can't blindly imitate the way someone makes those principles work. I've got to do it my own way. I've got to figure out my own way to do it that is adapted for my body, my brain, how I do things, and my environment. Or like another good way of looking at this, right, is I have to optimize the principles for myself to understand them. Like anybody that's ever done any grappling, and everybody's ever done any judo or wrestling or BJJ will understand that what makes a technique work in grappling isn't always apparent from the outside looking at it. Because there's pressures and subtleties and nuances you can't see, you have to feel. And it's kind of the same thing with everything, right? Like my grip works in a certain way, but if you can't feel the pressures I'm using, you may not know why it works. Unless you're experienced enough and have an educated enough eye, but that's a separate point. As a beginner, you can't tell. I could make my grip.
Still a small percentage of people, even beyond that.
You could look at someone's pistol grip and imitate the way it looks perfectly and have it be a shit grip because you're not doing it the right way.
It may look the right way.
Exactly.
You can't measure.
I think people miss out on kind of that context, that nuance.
I think that, and I'm not falling into the a lot. Well, it's a cult. Jiu-jitsu is a cult. I don't care what anybody says, and I love jiu-jitsu. Don't get me wrong, but I've never fallen into the cult of jiu-jitsu because, as a law enforcement officer, I don't want to be rolling around on the ground with my duty belt and poking me in the hip, and if I got anything on my back and my radio, you know what I mean? I want to stay standing up if I can, as a law enforcement officer. So, the cult of jiu-jitsu, but what jiu-jitsu will give you, if you'll let your ego accept it, is you'll get tapped out over and over and over again. Doesn't matter what level you are until you get to something that's beyond anything I can imagine. And you won't know why. And you've got to ask the guy exactly what occurred because you didn't see it you didn't just, not experienced enough to see it coming. And when you see that, or when you go through that, when you're standing out there and you're instructing a new shooter, I get in my concealed carry classes, I get a vast majority of them never really shot before. Lots of small statured women, lots of people that really, a lot of women don't want to be there. Their husband just makes them come, but all these things. And when I'm working through, and I'm not even looking for that USPSA grip or that, I just want them as high on it with it. And I want as much out of it as I can get. But I used to be like, they're not listening. No, they're not it's not that they're not listening. They can't see what I just showed them because they don't have any background in it.
Yeah, they're not educated observers, and it's not their fault.
Exactly.
It's not their
Right.
fault.
No, it's not at all. You know what I mean? Not complaining at all about it. I'm complaining that we've got to do better in those situations.
It takes time and experience to be able to see what you need to see for any endeavor. You know, I'm not, whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whether it's long range rifle shooting, whether it's anything, right? If your eye isn't educated, if your awareness or perception isn't educated, you often don't understand what you're seeing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've been there a lot. I was there for, well, I'm still there over a lot of things with shooting. You know what I mean? I'm in my whole, but you know, where it really clicked to me, really did click. Taekwondo or points fighting or even MMA, you get hit. Okay, well, even my brain understands. He threw a right hook, and I didn't see it coming, and I got hit. Right, but when you get like a leg lock or some move that you didn't see coming, and you're just sitting there going, I literally don't understand, and he has to do it super slow. That was a turning point in. I became less judgmental as an instructor.
You know, and I would argue, going back to something you said a second ago, I would argue that, and this is not just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? It's also Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, you know, the classic stuff. It's also Judo. Any art that has any sort of locks, pins, submissions, anything like that, right? I think the best thing you can do for your development is to have to tap a lot.
Oh, I agree.
That is the best thing, because you can, like, people. I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine. He's a SWAT guy in Illinois, and he used to be a professional kickboxer. To his knowledge, he's the only guy to get a TKO with a cartwheel kick as a heavyweight.
Really?
Which is pretty cool, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But he said something in the podcast I had with him that I really liked. He goes, you know, nobody ever paid me to spar. I get paid for the fights. He's like, if you were scoring my sparring rounds, I would probably lose far more often than I won, because I'm putting myself in situations to have to work on things I'm not good at.
And to learn. Yep. To learn.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between somebody, you know, rolling and grappling or sparring and striking stuff that is trying to learn, and someone who has an ego that's attached to the way they want to appear to be.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and you can see it, like, I see it at local matches, right? The guys that really care about getting better, they're not so much worried about winning the local match. They're trying things out. Okay, on this stage, I'm going to try this and see if it works in an environment where the consequence isn't that high, you know? Whereas the guys that are like, I have to win the local match, who cares if you win the local match? I have to win the local match. They're not working on anything but what they're already good at.
Right. Yeah, I get a lot of, we do an open, well, it's not really an open range. Fridays, we call it B8s and bourbon. We used to shoot B8s every Friday, 25-yard B8s, and then we drink bourbon afterwards. Well, we still drink bourbon, but we don't always shoot B8s anymore. We've been working on the Bianchi Cup here lately, falling plate challenge, and it's just super frustrating to me. That should be the easiest course to clean. And you know what? I clean it by myself, but in front of people, there always seems to be one somewhere that, so I don't know what it is. But anyway, the thing is afterwards, sometimes guys will stay around shooting. I don't. My rule is this is 30 rounds. Like every course, it's 30 rounds on Friday, and I'm going to live with it the rest of the week. You know what I mean? It's that's my deal. That's my goal. And that's what I try to get everybody to do. But some guys want to shoot. So, you know, I'm drinking my bourbon there, and I'll watch them. And they're not doing anything on their weapon system to get better. They're doing whatever it was they were good at. So if they're good at shooting fast on big targets at 5 yards, they're standing at 5 yards shooting fast on big targets. You know what I mean? And they repetitively do that. And I just, in my head, I was like, you know, nobody pays to do this. So I'm not, you know, I'm not an instructor. They get to do what they want. But I see that repetitively. People is in shooting, and law enforcement is particularly kind of guilty of this, is returning to the things that they do well and not challenging the things they don't. We really struggle getting people to show up to low light I'm saying get departments to commit to low light. I should say different. And you know, because it's and the thing is, it's no harder than the daylight. It's just different. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
a little different skill set, a little different, but no big deal.
It's shooting with a couple extra steps.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of it that we're doing is, you know, with handheld lights too. You know, what if you get caught with a handheld light? What if you get caught with a weapons amount of light? What if you're shooting behind your headlights with red lights and blues on? It's literally 2 hours. You know what I mean? This isn't something that takes 12 hours to do, you know? But yeah, it's hard to get people out of what they do well. And I take myself back to SWAT days. We used to have what we call an 8-shot drill on a 2-inch dot. It's 2 rounds strong hand supported, 2 rounds weak hand supported, 2 rounds weak hand only, and 2 rounds strong handle. It's 8 shots. You know what I mean? And we'd shoot it first thing in the morning. We'd shoot it sometime when they were smoked, you know, like just smoked. And then at the end of the day, I would put them on 2-inch dots, and I would tell them to work on anything that they feel like they need to work on at any distance they want to work on it. And our rule was, hey, you stay in your arc of coverage, your area of fire, stay in your lane. Don't walk in somebody else's lane. They may be at 10, you may be, and I get some people think that's not safe or whatever, but in our rules, it was, in the way we applied the safety rules. And, you know, just guys would go back to 3 yards and they'd shoot that because they wanted that payback of that success, you know. And that's one of the ways I judged my guys, is I wanted to see the guys that were willing to fail, you know, and not fail catastrophically, but you know what I mean? That went somewhere that it wasn't 100% at the end of the day. You know what I mean? You got a chance to do anything you want to do. But here's the next thing. I did that for probably 10 years of my 20 years on the SWAT team. I don't remember where I learned the drill at, but wherever. Did I ever apply that to my speed shooting? Not until I took your course. I never applied that same, hey, go push yourself. You know what I mean? Hell no. When it came to speed shooting, I'm going to shoot at a pace and I'm going to be successful. You know what I mean? And, you know, it's the same thing. It's, geez, I did this for 27, 30 years. And here I am, you know, learning something that was so apparent. I should have known it.
Well, you know who Miyamoto Musashi was, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I read the, yep.
So in the foreword to his book, he's 60 years old when he's writing it. And he talks about the wars he's been in and the duels to the death and all the stuff he's done. And he goes, and now at 60, I figure this stuff out, basically. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he says, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the truth of it, right? And one of the biggest challenges as an instructor is trying to shortcut that for the younger guys. How do we get them to figure it out before their beards are gray? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think
that's the challenge.
Yeah, I think you're on an interesting path in the industry in terms of that, in terms of trying to short circuit their learning curve. And I think it's an interesting path in the industry. I think it's a difficult path. I don't think it's an easy path because of the preconceptions that you're fighting. You know what I mean, out there. And I'm talking about institutionally, you know, department wise, things like that. But I think it's an interesting path, and I think it's a valid path. You know what I mean? I think there's true validity in it, and it's worthwhile doing, even though you're bumping heads against you're challenging some ideas, you're bumping heads, you're doing. But the short circuit to it, like I don't care about the movement out or the movement in to a shooting position in terms of fractions of seconds. Like, it's not important to me. You know what I mean? I'm not shooting competitively, but you know what is important to me? What is the best way to move out and move into a shooting position? You know, I'm not measuring it the way you are, but I'm getting a lot out of the movement, you know, trying to get, especially older and stiffer I get, my movement gets jerkier and stiffer and, you know, less smooth, you know. But yeah, there's tons of applications to all these things. Once a person opens his mind and starts, if you get pissed off about the timer, like I don't care about a quarter of a second getting out of this position. What's the one you have up on the deal with you and is it Gabe White and you're doing your, I forget what you,
the Monticello drill. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, there's major learning points in that, but somebody like me 5 years ago have been like, I just skipped past it because I think you're measuring competition. You know what I mean? And you're not. You're just measuring movement. You know. And again, the perspective is everything. I'll never be as fast. I'll never be as fast as I was 5 years ago or 20 years ago. But I can be as fast as I can be right now. And if I don't work on it, I won't be. I can't be.
You know, and that's the last rabbit hole I'm gonna go down, I promise. And we're gonna wrap it up because we're over an hour already. But like that's the thing too now, right? For me, because I'm getting to be of that age, you know what I mean, where my performance ceiling is not going to be what it once was.
Well, you're bionic.
I am bionic, and
you're the
bionic
$6 million man.
Well, it's more like a bad guy from Star Wars, you know.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, more machine than man, twisted and evil. No, but anyway, I think the way to keep, because I really think that keeping young is a real thing. And here's what I mean by that. I'm not talking about undoing physical damage that can't be undone. Like my joints are never going to be the same again.
Right.
And because of that, I'll never be able to lift as heavy as I could because the joints can't handle it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I can't be strong. That doesn't mean I can't be fast. It just means I have to work with the reality of where I'm at, right? And what I can do for the rest of my life is become ever more efficient.
Yeah.
Ever more smart about the way I do, you know, ever continually smarter about the way I do things, continually more efficient about the way I do things, and make up the advantages that way, you know? And that's an interesting journey too, I think. And I think that when I talk about staying young, I think there's a mental aspect to this too. I see people get to a certain age, intelligent people, and they start to become rigid in their thinking. It doesn't mean they're not intelligent. They're still as smart as they always were, but they're no longer open to new ideas. They become frozen in their opinions and their ideas. And I think that is the beginning of the decline as you get older. I think you start to lose that neuroplasticity that your brain needs when you stop learning new things and stop looking at things in different ways and evaluating new opinions and new experiences. And I think that's something we have to do to stay healthy and happy as we get older. I think.
And I think that is, I do think things are changing wildly out there in terms of men's health, in terms of hormone replacements or hormone supplementation, in terms of peptides, in terms of healing. Things are like, I think people like you and me, we're the guinea pigs for what's going to be great for the generations to come. You know, we're the cutting edge of this because before this, it was operation. You know what I mean? There was no other choice for anything. You know, shoulder pain, cut it. You know what I mean? Knee pain, you know, cut on it. You know, and we're the cutting edge of that. But I do also believe that you hit on something big there in terms of the mind. The mind controls a lot more to do with, okay, there's some pain, but the mind can overcome pain. It has the ability. We have the ability to do that. But I think the older we get, that becomes a little more rigid. I used to love to get hit in the head. I used to, shared suffering was like, and you can ask any of my SWAT guys, they didn't see it quite this way. But to me, we were shared suffering and we were building bonds. Well, they don't see it that way, but we still got and have drinks together and we still have bonds, and we know which one's on speed dial if we got to bury a body, right? You know what I mean? But as you get older and you start letting that, yes, you not only do you create inflexibility in the mind, you start creating it in the body. It slides down. And I had that in a way. The opposite way is the only fulfillment. Well, I worked out basically to be a SWAT guy, and I worked out to massage being a really skinny dude early. You know what I mean? I worked out to try to be somebody else. but I didn't work out for the process. It wasn't enjoyable to me. I didn't run because I like to run. I didn't. And then so I got out, I got older and not really all that motivated anymore. The only thing that motivated me was the end product, and that was weight. But you can't lift as heavy at 60 years old, 62, 63. Yeah, it's just, you know what I mean? You can't do it. And I think I'm finally making some adjustments to that to keep the injuries down. And as an injury at, I don't know what age, but an injury when you get to be a certain age, all of a sudden turns into a disability for 6 months. It's not in the old days, it's I'll lay off for a week and be back at it, but it's not anymore.
What scares me is not the one injury. What scares me is the injury cascade, where I hurt one thing bad, and then because I'm compensating for that, I hurt something else bad.
Exactly.
And then before you know it, I'm out of the gym for 6 months, and I don't want that.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah, I do think that is like if a person, and I don't know, maybe Pat Mack is a little bit on the right path to this if he can mainstream the stuff, but a person can mainstream that and start people about 45, 50, wherever. Oh, you make $1 million, or does that even matter anymore? You can make millions of dollars, but in that side of the industry. But I'm not smart enough to do it. I'm just throwing that out there to smart people who can. I've got a friend here though. She's a personal trainer. She trains a lot of the fighters and stuff around. Annie Spence is her name, but she does a lot of adaptive training because she was in, I'm going to mess this up, but I think she was in New Zealand at kind of a Burning Man type event, sound asleep in her tent, and a storm came in and a tree fell on her, literally fell on her in the middle of nowhere in New Zealand. Took them forever to get her out, broke her hip, I mean, just the injuries were massive. She should have died. She didn't, but the rehab took forever. And then a hip got infected. This is like a year or two later, had to have a hip. But the things that she's doing physically now, the ability to adaptively work out sets her far apart. Now she's in Manhattan, Kansas, and if she was in a big city, I have no idea how much her company would be making, just on that ability to focus on it. But all this stuff's coming for sure. Like I think that, well, my dad loved to farm, and he farmed pretty much to the day he died, and it didn't matter how much it hurt or whatever. He just got up and farmed. You know what I mean? But back then there wasn't much else. You either quit, sat around the house, or you rocking chair, or you just continued to fight through the pain. We've got options, which are setting up the options for the next series of special operations guys whose bodies are getting beat up right now.
Yeah. And I think that it's getting better, like you said, for each successive generation, not just in terms of the prehab and rehab and the medicine, but also in terms of things operationally, like the fitness routines in the military and special operations are so much better now. Yeah. The kit is so much lighter. That kit is light now compared to what it was when I was humping it. And all that stuff matters, and it helps.
It does.
All right. So real quick, brother, tell people how to find you, how to find your business, your range, your training classes, all that good stuff.
It's not really worth looking up because my social media output isn't all that great, but it's defensemidwest.com. Our mental health side is Resolute Ranch and resiliencycompany.com. Buck Peddicord on social media. If you're open-minded, you're not afraid of topless fat guys working out, stuff like that. Yeah, it's not too hard. But I got a question before we wrap this up though.
What's that?
So, it appears as though the National Guard thing in LA is working, and it appears as though the National Guard thing in Washington, DC is working. So now and you never know whether Trump's running something up a flagpole just to get reactions or whether he's going to do it. But he's talking about Chicago, somebody that came from Chicago. The governor and the mayor say there's no crime problem in Chicago, and everybody else thinks there is. What would be your, just in terms of Chicago, not in terms of Trump or anything like that? I don't want to start that, but what do you think? What do you think coming from there? What do you think because it's a beautiful city, it needs a change.
In the beginning of my career, there was enough law enforcement, and the law enforcement was sufficiently backed by the bosses and by the politicians to do their jobs. And at least the good neighborhoods were safe. There was still a lot of crime, but nothing like it is now, right?
Yeah.
And I watched that change throughout my career. And based on the way the city and the state are being governed, and based on the attrition they've forced onto the police department, and I really think that there could be a lot of good done if, say, federal law enforcement and the National Guard were to come in and help out.
Yeah. I just wondered, I thought about that. Every time I hear something about Chicago, I'm like, I need to call Matt and ask him about this.
Yeah. And it's, to say there's not a crime problem in Chicago is disingenuous at best. Let's just put it that way.
Doesn't even make sense, does it? I got one more question.
All right. What you got? All
right. So tell me your greatest St. Patrick's Day Green River story. You have to have a good story from St. Patrick's Day sometime.
I will tell you the saddest St. Patrick's Day story.
Okay.
Because it was the end of an era. I was there when the cop bar was no more.
Oh, really?
So there was an Irish pub in Greektown, of all places. And it was like the central cop bar. There was 4 or 5 cop bars throughout the city that were really strongly patronized by the police department. And this one was, like I said, it's in Greektown, but it was an Irish pub. And it was the centrally located one that everybody would go to, right? So after the parade, we would all go to this pub in uniform, in our dress uniform, and drink. And it was accepted. I mean, it was just the way things were. And I remember the last year I ever did it, I'm in there with 2 of my buddies. And all of a sudden we looked around and there were no other police uniforms in the place. Nothing but a bunch of yuppies from the West Loop. And I'm drinking in uniform. And I remember thinking, I don't think this is the way we do things anymore. And that was the end of the era right there. That was the last time.
Yeah. That's a great story. That's a great story.
And it really was sad. It was there was a whole culture. There was a whole tribal atmosphere about being on the police department. And yes, it had its negatives. Of course it did. It had more positives than negatives, though, by far. And it gave kind of a pride of place and a pride of position and a desire to do a good job. You wanted to do a good job because you were the Chicago police. And I don't know that the young kids have anything like that anymore. I don't think they're given that.
Yeah, I don't know what mentors they have. A lot of that stuff's gone, and then they don't do the get-togethers and stuff like that.
No. And you can't blame them. I remember it didn't take that long after the story I just told you until cops wouldn't even drink in their own backyard.
Right. Yeah.
Because they could get in trouble if something happened and they were drunk.
Yeah. The first time Dan came here to train, I didn't know him at all. And he came in with Lex Worthy. He was working for Tier at the time. But anyway, he came in here. So we trained for whatever it was, a week. I don't even remember. And one of the things that we like to do if we have a big training is we like to have a little get together at the end of training the last day. And I have a little bar there, that's just private. And so anyway, I said, "Hey Dan, he's like, "Yeah, I don't fly out till 4 a.m. We can get together." And I said, "I'm going to invite some of my friends too." And he was a little leery. He's like, "Well, okay, but it's usually just for people in training, right? Except the only friends I invited were my SWAT guys." And basically heard me on the phone with one guy, and I said, "Hey, Dan broke us down. You really need to come have a beer. You don't have to stay long, no big deal, but show up tonight at whatever time it was." And the guy's like, "Well, and I'm like, "Hey, man, this is totally up to you, but I'm just telling you, you should come ask this guy a question or two and drink a beer tonight." I hung up. Dan goes, "Who was that?" So I told him. And anyway, every one of my SWAT guys show up that night. Every one of them. And, they drink beer and they laugh and they tell stories. And after it was over, we're going to go upstairs, have a couple more. And Dan said, he goes, "This is what I miss." He goes,
Yeah.
This is what me and the guys did. And he goes, "I'm really, really surprised that you can get that kind of a response." And I'm like, "Well, these are my guys, and this is what we do." And it's not about the drinking. It is a little bit, but it's not about the drinking. It's not about the partying. It's just about the commitment to each other. You know what I mean? Just that and I've gone places and I don't know that guy, but I have a commitment to him because we're peers,
Well, and there's a certain level of, like, as the kind of man that goes into that line of work, there's a certain kind of bonding that can't be done when you're doing the job itself.
Right.
Because you're all business, you're doing the job.
Yeah. And you're vulnerable to public scrutiny.
But then blowing off steam in private with everybody on the team afterwards, that's where you really become friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, brother.
And there's got to be a new healthy way to do it. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, I just don't know what
I only know the old way.
All right, I got to get ready for the next one. But
right on, man.
I really enjoyed talking to you, my friend. This was a good one. And anybody out there, if you're looking for a training facility to host a class, you want to go to Kansas. I know it's Kansas. I know people think it's boring. It is not boring. I have the best time every time I go there. So you should definitely seek out Buck. And if you live in Kansas, go to one of his classes. You'll be better for it.
I appreciate that. It's great talking to you, brother.
All right, brother. I will talk to you again soon.
See you.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.